You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 14th of April 2014. Scotland faces £143 billion debt after independence. UK uses health workers in counter-terror plan. Daily Mail claims shock at halal slaughterhouse, what have we told them for years? Austrian MEP Andreas Meltzer withdraws from EU elections. Financial sector spends €120 million on EU lobbying. The cashless society is almost here and with some very sinister implications. Universities to teach students how to be a lesbian in 10 days or less. Thought for the day, are you proud to be British? And finally, what do you call three Kerrymen standing in a field? UK news, Scotland faces £143 billion debt after independence. Scotland would be saddled with £143 billion of debt after independence and forced to make deeper spending cuts than seen under the coalition's austerity drive, academics have warned. Extra North Sea oil revenues would only cover a third of that shortfall. World at 8, the Scots have had it pretty good, so would really suffer if English money went out, and we could of course make them pay for their own parliament building, for starters. UK uses health workers in counter-terror plan. Muslims in the UK say they're unfairly targeted by programme asking medical workers to identify potential terrorists. Medical workers, most would agree, have one important job to do, look after the well-being of their patients. However, in the UK, employees of the National Health Service are now being assigned another task, identifying potential terrorists. This new directive comes from the PREVENT programme, part of the UK government's counter-terrorism strategy, created in the wake of the July 2005 London bombings. World at 8. To be honest, I haven't seen many Muslim health workers in my part of the world, but if the cap fits, wear it. Daily Mail claims shock at halal slaughterhouse. What have we told them for years? British law requires abattoirs to stun animals before slaughter, but there is an exemption for Jewish and Muslim producers. Knife poised at the throat of a helpless sheep, this is the moment a slaughterman cuts the throat of a fully conscious animal. Our exclusive pictures reveal for the first time the full horror of a religious practice that Britain's top vet wants outlawed. Undercover Mail on Sunday investigators secretly filmed inside a halal abattoir as more than 100 sheep appeared to writhe in agony after being ritually killed. They were placed on a conveyor belt with their legs tethered before the knife was drawn swiftly across their throats. In the seconds after the sudden cut, the sheep strained to raise their heads as blood poured from their wounds. They twitched and convulsed as they were hoisted by their hind legs on metal hooks to drain their bodies of blood. In non-halal abattoirs, livestock are stunned before killing to prevent unnecessary suffering. Some halal abattoirs also practice pre-stunning. But animals we saw at this abattoir were fully conscious when slaughtered, a practice campaigners say is inhumane and needlessly cruel. Killing an animal without prior stunning is illegal in Britain, but the law gives special exemption to Muslim and Jewish meat producers on the ground of religion. According to some Islamic scholars, stunning an animal before it's slaughtered for meat is not permitted. There are believed to be about 12 abattoirs dedicated to unstunned slaughterhouses in the UK and hundreds of abattoirs that do stunned halal slaughter. Denmark and Poland have recently banned unstunned ritual slaughter, a precedent animal welfare groups in Britain want the government to follow. Last night, John Blackwell, the new president-elect of the British Veterinary Association, said, "We would like to see unstunned slaughter banned in the UK on the grounds of animal welfare. There is current scientific evidence which says animals do feel pain if they're slaughtered without stunning." World at 8. This is a day late and $1 short. In other words, the barn door has been open for many years and the media has not cared. Why are they jumping on the bandwagon now? I have never heard of any halal slaughterhouses that practice using stunning methods on animals. The Daily Mail are, as usual, softening the blow by publishing part truths. The whole point about halal and kosher laws is that the animal is left unstunned, so the blood flows quicker while the heart beats fast in fear. The BNP have been saying this for years, so yet another point taken up so near the elections. European news. Austrian MEP Andreas Meltzer withdraws from EU elections. Austrian MEP Andreas Melzer of the Freedom Party announced on Tuesday 8th of April he will quit the European election after making comments comparing the EU with the Third Reich. The Austrian politician, who has been an MEP since 2004, has said the EU is in danger of turning into a conglomerate of Negroes where chaos multiplies through mass immigration. World at 8. He should have had the courage of his convictions and still stood. He is right. Financial sector spends €120 million on EU lobbying. Brussels. The EU's financial industry spends more than €120 million per year and employs over 1,700 lobbyists to work in the EU institutions, according to new research by transparency campaigners. The report on the firepower of the financial lobby, published on Wednesday 9th of April by the Corporate Europe Observatory, found that more than 700 different financial industry groups were active in the EU institutions since 2013. Its findings will come as no surprise to Brussels insiders. The lobbying industry has boomed in recent years as the EU law-making powers have increased and financial sector legislation has been a key priority of its institutions in the current legislative term. Since the 2008 financial crisis, which prompted EU governments to pump in around €1.6 trillion to keep their banks afloat, the EU has passed a raft of legislation aimed at tightening regulation ranging from the banking and insurance sectors to derivatives and credit rating agencies. World news. The cashless society almost here, with some very sinister implications. Among the long list of items bundled by consensus reality merchants under the banner of conspiracy theory is a world without cash, where technocrats rule over the populace and everything and anything is exchanged via plastic and RFID chips. In this sterile and controlled Orwellian high-tech society, the idea of cash being passed from hand to hand would be as archaic as the thought of carrying around a rucksack of tally sticks today. Still, despite the incredible penetration of credit and debit card transactions into economic aggregate and the boom in internet shopping, few will comfortably admit that a cashless society is nearly upon us. In part, it's a natural denial by many fuelled by the idea our society is indeed on a collision course with the sort of dystopic impersonal future like that depicted in the 1970s sci-fi film classic Logan's Run. Over the years, futurists and commentators alike seem to agree that a cashless society will be a slow creep and would automatically phase itself in simply by virtue of the sheer volume of the electronic transactions that gradually make cash less available and more costly to redeem or exchange. This is still true for the most part. What few counted on, however, was how the final push would take place and why. Some will be surprised by these new emerging mechanisms and the political and sinister implications they ultimately lead to: introduction of parallel currencies. There's been a lot made about the cashless society in media, but this cannot fully happen until there is a cashless currency. Every revolution needs a good crisis in order to germinate its seed. The cashless revolution is no different. It should be abundantly clear by now that the global financial meltdown has been engineered at every juncture of its unfolding by the very private central banks who expand and contract the money's supply. A dollar or euro collapse will trigger a global economic crisis, which is a prime opportunity to introduce the next phase. Universities to teach students how to be a lesbian in 10 days or less. An upcoming LGBTQ seminar at the University of South Carolina upstate will teach students how to be a lesbian in 10 days or less and will focus on LGBTQ cultural mores. According to the school's website, theatre artist Lee Hendricks will perform her one-woman show, How to be a Lesbian in 10 Days or Less, to kick off the 6th Bodies of Knowledge Symposium and Conference. The show is a 1-hour performance that follows Butchie McDyke, a motivational speaker and expert lesbian, as she deftly guides her captive audience in an exploration of self-discovery and first love, coming out, lesbian sex, queer politics and the really important Reba McEntire song. World date. I suppose it'll come to the UK, but really, does anyone need lessons in sexuality today? It's all over the place. Every sort, every colour, every position, every odd mismatch or need. In fact, too much really. There's no mystery anymore. It's such a shame. Thought for the day: are you proud to be British? Today there was an article in the Daily Mail on being proud to be British, and my single question is, what the hell is British? The Union flag is British, which means it comprises at the moment of the English, Scots and Welsh flags. But it essentially means the United Tribes of Britannia and not the disunited tribes of the rest of the world. It states that pride in being British is at an all-time low, clearly a negative message sent out to the sheeples who probably never give it a thought anyway. Our so-called Utes and less privately educated, or with sterling home lives and at the local comps, have been at the root of the self-hate propaganda for many years and are busy being anything but English, or even thinking along the lines of being English. It isn't cool to be English, let alone British, for our youngsters, who have been indoctrinated to think that any other nationality is preferable and the darker and more opposite in cultures the better and more desirable it is. The other day 3 young white girls went past in our local shopping centre, which is like living in the boonies on a bad day, and all had produced babies, and all these babies were half-caste African children. So if this has come all the way out to us in Hampshire, imagine what London and the larger cities are like, and I bet you won't see a single white face in many areas nowadays. The problem with the Marxist and Muslim creeds is that whilst they are busy changing the social face of England and exhorting the foreigners to become British, devaluing our land to the point where anyone in Beijing can buy property and not even see it in our capital, undervalue and destroy our cultural heritage by taking away all the manufacturing of what used to be the best of British and making us a third world enclave reliant on the goodwill of farmers in Europe and Africa and huge unmonitored factories in China and India, what is left that is British or even English in our country? Successive governments and media have encouraged our young to desegregate to a degree where mixed partnerships are preferable to the public and are in fact a boon to the genocide brigade, with at least a couple of mixed race generations all busy being British but of course not English or with any English pride. Now I'm the first to say you cannot help who you fall in love with, but we are not talking love or commitment about many of these relationships. We're talking about media hype and fashion accessories and the subsequent effect on the undereducated morons and the overeducated liberal a-holes. How can you expect an entire generation to be proud of being British when there's no such animal and very little of its country is left to be proud of? In days of old, when conditions were not perfect, and many went really hungry, infant mortality was high, and even adults from moneyed classes could die from diseases which are now cured, there were more people per capita that were proud to be English, regardless of how life was then now, when we apparently have everything to live for. But pride is not one of them. As a nationalist I love my country and some of my tribes, but not all. Even I can see the lazy and stupid stripes that go down the back of many who think they are intelligent and cultured and are worth it. Now what worth it means I really don't know, other than a certain hair dye producer and their catchphrase. How can a people that allow massive immigration, mixed marriages out of the wazoo, foreign property ownership and business takeovers, educational takeovers, media anti-white propaganda, and non-monitoring of foreigners' health status and so much more into our country, so that there's virtually nothing left of this country from 50 years ago, think they can be thought of as patriotic, when patriotism is a byword now for racism and all that this word entails in modern day Britain. How far down the ethnic scale we are now is in the name of the director of the British Future think tank, which is Sundar Katwala, yet another ethnic who has yet another well-paid souped-up position in stating the sodding obvious about Britain, or rather England. The official lack of Britishness is not put down to the fact that there are probably few Brits left in the areas they scouted for this figure of only a third, and in fact I would be surprised if there are even a third of real English left in this country anyway, to be the third quoted. Shoot me now. Ethnics are not British in my book, they are not English, and few are white, which is why they are called ethnics. The Eastern Europeans are white and hopefully Christian, which is why all the anti-immigration diatribe surging to the forefront just before the EU elections is directed at them and not the hordes of Africans who are proving to the point by travelling through the EU to us in the UK, coming now this summer to a locale near you. Now on a personal level I couldn't give a rat's arse about mixed marriages or half-caste kids, but of course it does matter. If the white race is being outbred, and it is, and all the Arab Muslims and African Muslims are producing 5 kids per whatever unit you care to mention, and having multiple wives and still managing to impregnate white girls as well, the figures given for the genocide of the white English race in Great Britain must be brought forward by at least 10 years. Put this with the apparent demise of the white mature person who is rapidly, according to the media, going balmy and needing their bums wiped all the time. Say this enough and even our own families will want us dead. Then who is left to be proud of being English or British? Work it out. This is the offside and direct result of the establishment propaganda. Get the young, like the Jesuits said. Give me the first 5 years of a child's life and I give you the man. And nothing is truer. The communists knew this and were behind the liberals and hippies of the 60s with their anti-war and pro-love propaganda. Don't think for a moment that the anti-discipline brigade of babies and children were thinking of improving those lives. They weren't. They were getting the Western world to create generations of soulless, unpatriotic and undisciplined youngsters who fled to alcohol, drugs and sexual proclivities too early and were and are for the most part out of control today and form part of the me generation who thinks about their country last, if at all. Put this with the fact that millions of foreigners who are to all intents and purposes brown, black and yellow and not of Saxon stock are all busy calling themselves or being allowed to call themselves British. The news shrieks it out: British born, British woman, British man. Then the names say it all. These people are not British. They are not English. They do not need to be called British as they all came from originally non-British countries. But they are all, unfortunately, over here. Part of the reason for the no pride in being British is apparently the Iraq War, but was picked up slightly by the Olympics. What crap! It reminds me of the days of the war in Vietnam, which incidentally, if it hadn't been for the French mishandling everything over there as usual, the US would not have had to go in. When all the campuses were full of out-of-their-head students, fuelled up with Marxist reefers, fighting authority in their country, whilst their soldiers were dying, fighting the Chinese-backed Viet Cong. Talk about the lack of patriotism and stupidity. Wars are awful and no one really wins, but the reason why so many modern wars fail is the lack of patriotism from the people of that country. Nationalism and patriotism are the unspoken enemies of liberal thinking today, and since the end of the last war, when anti-nationalists gained the right-thinking heads of the establishment and the New World Order, which condemns all nationalism in whatever form it takes, and by doing so undervalues and demeans our fighting and serving personnel. The messages given out by the media in plays, news and articles are the same. Our soldiers are all coming home with PTSD, families are suffering, the men cannot take the killing of civilians and opt out of serving and end up on the streets, their own superior officers send them for court-martials for acting like soldiers should act under fire, and at the same time the government cuts drastically all the men and the money which our armed forces need. There is no clearer message to the liberal Marxist scum of today than that. We have no value, our country has no value, and we fight for no one because we don't have the stomach for it. Now if that isn't a message of no pride in being British, I don't know what is, and I don't need some sodding foreigner telling me that. When a nationalist government is in power in the future, restoring pride in our country is the first thing we will do. And finally, what do you call 3 Kerrymen standing in a field? A thicket. And here are 3 more naughty un-PC jokes to brighten your Monday. A Muslim bloke I worked with was bragging he had an entire Koran on DVD. Being interested, I asked him to burn me a copy. Well, that's when it all kicked off. An Irishman wanting to become a priest went to see the bishop, who said, "You must answer 3 questions on the Bible. First, who was born in a stable?" "Red rum," he replied. "Second, what do you think of Damascus?" "It kills 99% of all household germs," he replied. "Third, what happened when the disciples went to Mount Olive?" "That's easy," he said. "Popeye kicked the shit out of them." 2 Irishmen looking through a mail order catalogue. Paddy says, "Look at these gorgeous women, the prices are reasonable too." Mick agrees. I'm ordering one right now. 3 weeks later, Paddy says to Mick, "Has your woman turned up yet?" "No," said Mick, "but it shouldn't be long now. Her clothes arrived yesterday." You have been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozar and I wish you all a very good night. £3 billion debt after independence. UK uses health workers in counter-terror plan. Daily Mail claims shock at halal slaughterhouse. What have we told them for years? Austrian MEP Andreas Meltzer withdraws from EU elections. Financial sector spends €120 million on EU lobbying. The cashless society is almost here and with some very sinister implications. Universities to teach students how to be a lesbian in 10 days or less. The Scots have had it pretty good, so would really suffer if English money went out, and we could of course make them pay for their own parliament building, for starters. UK uses health workers in counter-terror plan. Muslims in the UK say they're unfairly targeted by programme asking medical workers to identify potential terrorists. Medical workers, most would agree, have one important job to do: look after the well-being of their patients. However, in the UK, employees of the National Health Service are now being assigned another task.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 14th of April 2014. Scotland faces 140 identifying potential terrorists. This new directive comes from the Prevent programme, part of the UK government's counter-terrorism strategy created in the wake of the July 2005 London bombings. World at 8. To be honest, I haven't seen many Muslim health workers in my part of the world, but if the cap fits, wear it. Daily Mail claims shock at halal slaughterhouse. What have we told them for years? British law requires abattoirs to stun animals before slaughter, but there is an exception. Thought for the day: are you proud to be British? And finally, what do you call 3 Kerrymen standing in a field? UK news. Scotland faces £143 billion debt after independence. Scotland would be saddled with £143 billion of debt after independence and forced to make deeper spending cuts than seen under the coalition's austerity drive, academics have warned. Extra North Sea oil revenues would only cover a third of that shortfall. World at 8.